EU leaders are discussing the use of Russian assets to further finance Ukraine, as well as strengthening their own defense capabilities. The plan is to be prepared for a possible military conflict by 2030. But how can this goal be achieved, and what are the most vulnerable points? This is currently being discussed in Denmark, where drones recently paralyzed the operation of 6 airports. How did this affect the agenda of Danish leaders, and what are they planning to agree on? Radio Liberty EU correspondent Zoryana Stepanenko will tell us more.
The story of drones that regularly disturb European skies is reflected both in the summit's agenda and in the conditions under which Denmark's Prime Minister is hosting EU leaders. They are being guarded by a German frigate off the coast of Copenhagen, which controls the airspace, and the meeting venue is surrounded by air defense systems. For the duration of the summit, they even banned the use of civilian drones, since just last week these devices paralyzed the operations of 6 airports, and it is suspected that Russia is behind this. The defense of Europe amid rising threats is one of the 2 major topics up for discussion. The second is Ukraine, so both topics are inextricably linked. The plan is to rearm by 2030 in order to be able to defend ourselves. The European Commission has proposed several new flagship projects, including a drone wall, saying this is feasible and can be built quickly. Today, all these projects are mandatory.
When I look at Europe today, I think we are in the most complex and dangerous situation since the end of World War II, even more so than during the Cold War. Of course, I want us to rearm. We had more opportunities. We implemented more innovations.
When it comes to innovation, Ukraine's experience is considered indispensable. Its attack and its production capabilities are planned to be utilized. Today, Ukraine received 4 billion euros, a new tranche of credit, which is being repaid thanks to the profits from frozen Russian assets. It is expected that 2 billion out of the 4 will be spent on drone production, said the head of the European Commission. They are also discussing the use of the assets themselves. There is a proposal to give Ukraine a reparations loan in the amount of 140 billion euros. The assets would serve as collateral, and Ukraine would only have to repay the loan if it receives compensation from Russia. It's a sensitive issue, says the president of the European Commission. Countries have their doubts, but their attitude is generally positive. We also hear this from diplomats who, speaking anonymously, share details about the discussions at the summit.
There is a growing consensus among us that not only European taxpayers should bear the cost of supporting Ukraine, but that Russia must also be held accountable. Russia is to blame. I think now we have a reliable legal way to do this through the proposal on reparations.
Another sensitive issue that leaders will discuss is Ukraine's future membership in the EU. The negotiation process is being blocked by Hungary. Further progress is currently impossible. But the President of the European Council has proposed to review the procedure. To open negotiation chapters by a majority vote, not unanimously, unanimity would only be required to close them. But again, such a change in procedure must be agreed upon by all EU countries, including Hungary, accordingly. Viktor Orban made it clear before the summit that he would not agree to this, and once again spoke out against Ukraine's EU membership, as he does not consider it a sovereign state.
They don't truly have
the money to support themselves. We pay for their army, their government apparatus, their pensions. We pay for everything. If someone else is supporting you, then you are not a sovereign country. This is not a statement, but a financial fact.
The summit in Copenhagen is informal and does not provide for any decisions. But if the discussions go well before the next meeting, which is scheduled for the end of October, the European Commission will prepare a roadmap for rearming Europe. As for the reparations loan, it's difficult to predict when it will be approved. At the moment, the idea is more in the category of if it gets approved. Zoryana Stepanenko, Marek Hajduk, Radio Svoboda, especially for TSN 1 episode.
What could Russian provocations in the air escalate into? Share your thoughts in the comments under this broadcast on YouTube, and of course, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. In the meantime, I will continue the TSN broadcast.
Weapon supplies, agreements on the purchase of Ukrainian drones and joint production. These topics will be discussed at the consultations of the Ukrainian Technical Negotiating Team in Washington as early as today. Active negotiations with the United States will continue for the next 2 to 3 weeks. 4 agreements will be discussed. Official Kyiv wants to sign them with the United States in the near future. They include both military and economic components. Our special correspondent in Washington, Dmytro Onopchenko, will tell you more about the expected results.
The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense has confirmed that, starting today, a domestic negotiation team led by Deputy Minister Serhiy Boyev is in Washington. And this is only part of the negotiations and only some of the negotiators, because over the next 2 or 3 weeks, they really want to discuss the details regarding the supply of American weapons, joint drone production with the Americans, and eventually the sale of drones to the United States or to global markets together with the US. They are also set to talk about a free trade agreement, as well as a document on security guarantees. Let's go through everything step by step. The negotiations will begin at the Pentagon, for now at a technical level, and here they want to sort out the issue of drones, because their production requires not only technology, but mostly investment. And they want to start forming the Ukrainian weapons request right now. How did this usually work? During Biden's administration, Kyiv, through the US Embassy's military attaché in Ukraine, would send in advance a list of weapons and ammunition that might be needed at the front, taking into account current tasks, problems, and challenges. After that, the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense and the Pentagon would communicate directly, because it was necessary to determine what was available in American military warehouses and what needed to be paid for and ordered from manufacturers right away. In the end, the president himself would personally give the go-ahead. Now the situation is different. Formally, purchases go through NATO, but Ukraine is aiming for a mega deal, a weapons contract worth $90 billion. So even though the payment for it will come from the Europeans, it's important to discuss directly the weapons deliveries and, most importantly, what Kyiv wants to see included in these supplies. And in fact, this is going to happen. Other areas, besides the military one, include negotiations on free trade between Ukraine and the United States. Such an arrangement really hasn't existed, even though the idea was first discussed back in 2021. The thing is, America is not a critically important trading partner for Ukraine. But what's much more important here is economic integration into the US market for Ukraine's largest manufacturers, those in the so-called top 10 in terms of technology. Fourth, and most importantly, Ukraine wants not just to receive clear security guarantees from America, but to make them legally binding so as not to repeat the story of the Budapest Memorandum. There is already a list of what Kyiv wants to receive from the White House as guarantees. I won't disclose the preliminary points on air right now, because a visit from two negotiators, Yermak and Umarov, is expected. And they will hold another discussion here in Washington specifically about concrete guarantees. So it's worth waiting for that. As for the timing, since a major visit by the Ukrainian government delegation led by the Prime Minister is tentatively planned for mid-October in Washington, it is logical to expect that this stage of technical consultations is also planned to be completed by around the middle of next month, at least tentatively. But it's important to note that, in parallel, work will also have to be done with Congress. Before going on air, I checked with several of the best law professors who specialize in international treaties and America's obligations. And they are absolutely unanimous. They say that if Ukraine wants a legal document, a document that will be binding, then after it is signed, it must be sent here to the Senate. But things are not so simple with the lawmakers. Most Republicans, and of course they listen to President Trump, but ratification has often been a slow process. There are precedents when the president, the top official, signs a document, but Congress is in no hurry. For example, the START I Treaty, which Bush and Gorbachev signed in 1991, was only ratified in December 1994. Or here in Congress, they will always remind you about the Genocide Convention signed by the United States, which, believe it or not, was only ratified 40 years later, because lawmakers insisted that separate laws had to be passed first. Well, in other words, you always want to hope for the best, but at the same time, it's important to stay focused and immediately discuss with the Americans the need not only for a quick signing, but also for swift ratification. And so that the White House starts working with the senators right now to secure the necessary votes. It feels like many processes are now reaching the final stretch, or at the very least could be getting there. And it's also important to remember Ukraine's position. Kyiv was ready to enter peace talks only after receiving those clear security guarantees. And that's why this gives us an understanding of the timeline for possible major negotiations. Well, that is, of course, if the policy of pressure on Russia currently being pursued by the United States actually yields results. From Washington, Dmitry Onopchenko, Serhiy Koval, American Bureau of Inter TV Channel.